Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is Joe Smith and joined alongside me for this one, of course, is Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, good to see you as always. Only one place we can possibly start on this Friday morning. It's not exactly a positive note either. We will reflect on exactly what happened at Blundell Park on Wednesday night, look ahead to tomorrow's clash with Burnley at Old Trafford, and look ahead to what might happen in the final days of the summer transfer window as well. Samuel, let's start with what happened on Wednesday night on the Lincolnshire coast. United out of the Carabao Cup at the second round hurdle. For the first time in 11 years, they entered the competition at this stage, and the second time in a row they've exited it at this stage as well. Not quite as harrowing as that 4-0 defeat MK Dons in 2014, but the result arguably more damaging than what it was back then in the grand scheme of things. Just a nightmare night for United in every possible way.
Yes, I'm glad you can see me because it looks like I'm in a really cavernous setting here, even though my blinds are open, the light is coming through, but I suppose it is suitably dark after the result a couple of days ago. I half joked with my dad that, United have had a bad one when 5 Live and Sky Sports News are getting in touch with me asking if I'd come on. But fortunately for United, yesterday was my day off, and sometimes you want to actually work those days because they're going to be busy and they almost take care of themselves. There's a lot of news to get stuck into. There's a lot to get your teeth stuck into as well. But I think it's safe to assume that when I go to Carrington in a couple of hours, Ruben Amorim will be the manager who walks through the door and hosts the press conference. But that result in midweek, it was worse than MK Dons. The ramifications of it, I suspect, will be far greater than that game. The MK Dons game, Louis van Gaal played players who were sold the following week, who he wanted out of the club, who really didn't have much of a future at the club. I think it was only David De Gea and Johnny Evans who started that game, who you'd have thought at the time that they were going to be at the club for the remainder of the season. I mean, De Gea starting was quite a surprise, whereas in midweek on Wednesday evening, that team cost £401.61 million to assemble, and it was not a cheap bench either. But it was a really troubling night for so many reasons. And watching Ruben Amorim, we were fortunate that we had places in the press box at Grimsby, which was actually quite big for a League Two team. And we were pretty much not right behind the dugout, but the dugout was, 20, 30 feet away. It was not far away at all whatsoever. We had a great view of the pitch, great view of all the colour going on around us. And Amorim looked furious from the off, which is understandable because United were under the cosh from kick-off, and they didn't seem to have the coping mechanisms for it. And his body language has literally never, ever been worse. And I was checking with my editor, the broadcast was getting a lot of Amorim here. And he said, no, they weren't really switching to him. And of course they did later on in the game, rather infamously, with the little tactics board that he was playing around with. But he was absolutely seething from the off. And he doesn't want to be that way. He doesn't want to be on his haunches as often as he was, but he might as well be on his knees at the moment, the way that United are performing. And I think the moment where I really did worry for United, I'm pretty sure the challenge happened in the first 10 minutes. But it happened right in front of us, that tackle on Ahmad. And you knew immediately, even though we didn't have monitors, unsurprisingly, there were a lot of things we saw that we didn't need a replay for. And you knew then that it was a hard but fair tackle. And I just thought, after it was a sliding tackle, he goes flying. And I just thought, for United's sake, get up immediately, get on with it. And he didn't. He milked it. And he wasn't going to get any sympathy from the Grimsby staff. just across the white line in the dugout. He wasn't going to get any sympathy from the Grimsby players. It was right in front of that main stand, which was absolutely raucous. And that told you then and there that there were players who did not fancy it. And Ahmad is a really good player. He was United's second best player last season. He's a real fan favourite. He's a bit of a cult figure. But the reality is he did not fancy it the other night at Grimsby. He wasn't the only one. Manuel Ugarte trying to get a foul seconds before Grimsby scored. We've seen that before from him against West Ham United. He has an opportunity to come in the team and try and play well and give Amorim a dilemma going forward for the Burnley game. And United is so bad that Casemiro is a regular starter. Casemiro will start against Burnley, I'm sure. And that's not a good place for United to be in, never mind their midfield to be in. Andre Onana is playing his way out of the club with the 2 mistakes that he made for goals. He did not have a good penalty shootout either, as everybody saw. And just before the penalty shootout, he went down the tunnel and he was back indoors for quite some time. I think the coin toss even took place with Onana out of sight, and he'd been followed down by Georges Vital, the goalkeeping coach. And Altay Bayindir was at one point like looking down the tunnel thinking, when are they going to come out? Where are they? It'd been a while. And reading between the lines, you have to assume that they went indoors to do some last-minute prep for the penalty shootout, some last-minute analysis. Now, why are they doing that then, when they should be, you've got to cover all bases for a cup tie, whatever the opponent, do all your prep, don't leave any stone unturned. United clearly didn't do that. There was no water bottle telling them which way Grimsby penalty taker was likely to go. And for United to be that unprepared for a penalty shootout against a League Four, against a fourth tier team, is borderline unforgivable. And unfortunately for the manager, he has been making decisions over the last month that have been to the team's detriment, to the squad's detriment. Not everything is his fault, clearly. He cannot legislate for Onana letting one in at his near post. He can't legislate for some players not fancying it, which is pretty much what he said when he said the players spoke loudly towards him. I think he was saying that their performance spoke volumes, i.e. they weren't up for it. But I looking at Amorim the other night, that result, and he even said to us on the pitch afterwards that even if they'd won on penalties, it wouldn't have mattered because the performance was so atrocious. But the unravelling, there are all the signs of an unravelling taking place. And I've been in a press box, I've seen United managers unravel often enough to know the telltale signs. And unfortunately for him, I think he has crossed that point of no return now, in that if you're to be a success as a Manchester United manager, you have to win the title. I think when Ruben Amorim came in, you could envisage that happening in the future. As recently as last month in Chicago, I'd have still maintained that was the case. I don't think that's the case now. I think it would be an extraordinary success story if he was to stick it out at United and oversee a title win from where he's come from at the moment.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it, Samuel? You were out in the US. I covered the games back here through the night, and we were both quite impressed by what we saw. You spoke often on the podcast about the positive spirit within the camp and everything like that. And it just seems to have evaporated incredibly quickly with the start of the season that they've had. Ruben Amorim now, you've just said there, you feel that he's potentially at a point of no return. When you look at his domestic record, it's 8 wins in 34 matches. That is nowhere near good enough. It's atrocious for a Manchester United manager. Obviously, a lot of caveats to apply, but 8 wins in 34 again in domestic competitions, it's appalling, isn't it? It is so poor. Yeah,
it's indefensible, and that's why we're not just going off 1 or 2 results. I mean, this season they've lost 1 game, they've drawn the other 2, but they are already in crisis mode, because Manchester United have gone to a fourth tier team and they've been knocked out of the League Cup by them. And this season they could have as few as 40 games, which would be probably 20 fewer than last season, I think. And even if they were to go all the way to the FA Cup final, I think that would be overall, that'd be 45 matches. 45 matches, that's still 15 fewer than last season. So it's a pretty galling season anyway. It's pretty galling for us to know that we're just going to have Premier League games to cover between now and the start of January when the FA Cup third round ties are played. But obviously, I think his Premier League record is 7 wins in 29, which is horrendous. And as I think I said on the podcast the other day, it's like those wins are like a trail of breadcrumbs, and that trail has run out now because it was a couple of wins in December, a couple of wins in January, one in February, one in March, one in May, and then we've not had a win since then. And of course, as you say, with the domestic record, where he's, although they got to the fifth round of the FA Cup last season, there was just the one win because the Arsenal shootout, that counts as a draw. And really, somebody asked me last week, do you think he can, do you think he'll be okay for the rest of the season? And the answer is, if it continues this way, no, it can't be. It is a results business. It's that, I know it's a cliche that has been trotted out so many times, but he said it himself. You need to win games, need to score goals. Manchester United don't score enough goals. They certainly don't win enough games. And there is some mitigation behind why they've struggled to the start of the season beyond his control. I think that the failure to have, I know it's going to change now with Garnacho, but the failure to have sold a player with 3 days remaining of the transfer window is, even for United, that is quite extraordinary. It's not surprising, but it is still extraordinary. When you look at some of the sellable assets in that team, even outside Bayern, if they just proactively offered him around Europe at the start of the summer, I am sure they'd have sold him. And I think that would have been the right decision, because then it would have given them the headroom and the leverage to go out there and get a goalkeeper early doors who was going to compete with Onana and who could feasibly have started the season, but they didn't do it. But mainly the reason why they're playing bad, they've had some decent periods in games, but they certainly did play badly against Grimsby. But his decisions have been to the club's detriment. He has mismanaged the two most important positions in a football team, which are the striker and the goalkeeper. The contrary call of starting Bayern over Onana. Then when Onana came back in, his confidence is bound to be fragile. It still does not excuse the mistakes he made in midweek, but it is some added context to it. And the striker situation, I think holding back Sesko has backfired, because obviously he's put into a game in midweek where it's blood and thunder, and it was probably more intense, that start, than it was against Arsenal and against Fulham, or possibly more intense than anything he experienced against Arsenal and Fulham as a substitute, because Grimsby were at United from the off, and they, fair dues to them, they unnerved United. United are easily cowed, and also they have a couple of cowards in their team, as they demonstrated in midweek. And I know while we were waiting for him on the pitch afterwards, we were trying to earwig on some of the broadcast chats he did. And I think when he was speaking to Gabriel Clark, he was very defensive of the system. And he said, last year, we played well at Arsenal, we played well at Liverpool, we reached the Europa League final. And that is proof that that system can work, and it has got some merit if everyone's hitting their cues. And we did see it a little bit in pre-season, although those performances essentially don't matter. But as soon as the meaningful stuff has started, United look clueless as to how to play for a striker. That rigidity is setting again. Players are starting to be, overawed by the expectation of playing for the club. Somebody, who knows, one of the players said last week or the week before to me, just how the expectation of United, it is too much for some of the players there. And you can see that anyway. But when people who are quite close to players are admitting it and are aware of it, and they're quite philosophical with that fact and have made peace with it, that is a really, really worrying sign. Because that squad is nowhere near at the level it should be anyway, and there are so many issues. The goalkeeper's not been sorted out, and they don't really have a number one at the moment. On the left wing, they do not have a senior left winger. Patrick Dorgu is only starting by default. He had a very good pre-season tour. He has not kept it up, that form. Midfield is, you look at it and you'd think if there was one player you'd want to keep, it should be Kobbie Mainoo over the others, but he's the one who wants out. And I think United have really got to dig their heels and ensure that he doesn't go, because they can't afford him to go, looking at how light that department is. and up front they don't score enough goals. And there's a situation with the striker there where since the start of pre-season they've had 8 games, they've won 2 of them, and those 2 wins came with Rasmus Højlund starting. They were his only starts, and I know they're only pre-season games, but you did see in those matches United playing well with a striker in the team and playing for a striker in their team and servicing a striker. Take a striker out of that team, it changes the dynamic completely. And that was a massive error. And look, I sort of expressed before, Højlund is not good enough to start for United. 3 goals in his last 35 games. Completely understand United's rationale for wanting to sell him. But while he's there, maximise him if you're not going to start a striker in his absence. And Amorim's not done that, and it's cost him.
Yeah, obviously 2 strikerless formations against Arsenal and Fulham, but Sesko did start against Grimsby, Samuel, and to be fair, we didn't see much of him, did we? Like you said there, they don't really seem to know how to play with a striker. That is the problem that this group of players seems to have, but you'd expect him to hopefully get that first league start of the season against Burnley tomorrow, and hopefully it's a game United can turn up in, but their Premier League record, it's 1 win now in their last 11 league games. And this calendar year, they've only beaten 2 current Premier League teams when you factor in the wins over the 3 relegated clubs. Just how big do you think is this game against Burnley tomorrow? It's must win 3 games in, ultimately, isn't it?
Of course. And people say if he doesn't win, he'll be under even more pressure. The Manchester United manager is always under pressure. He's always got to deliver. He's always got to make a difference and get them further up the table. The pressure is unrelenting, and that's the way it should be. And I don't think United manager would want it any other way either. And people can look ahead and think, if they don't win against Burnley, then it's City and then it's Chelsea. But this is one of the worst cliches in football. But Chelsea and City are completely irrelevant at the moment. That shouldn't even come into the consideration of it, because United can't really. It's not a case of looking at the teams who are part of the old Big Six with United, because United aren't in their slipstream. Burnley will quite rightly fancy their chances against United this weekend. They had a phenomenal defensive record in the Championship last season. I know the goalkeeper has gone, James Trafford isn't there anymore, but Scott Parker was the manager last season. He's still there. I don't think there's been quite as much churn in Burnley's squad as there has been in Sunderland's. You're the expert on that, George, obviously from obviously watching the Championship as frequently as you do. And look at how Grimsby unsettled United to the point where they scored 2 goals and they had a goal disallowed as well. So why shouldn't Burnley fancy their chances against United? It is a much bigger game than any of us could ever have imagined at this stage of the season. It's certainly not ideal for us, but there are, having covered United for 10 and a bit years that I have done, looking at the past, there are some parallels there. Certainly Ten Hag's first season, they had a really bad start, but they did get going with a huge win against Liverpool. And then they had a very good season. So the season is eminently salvageable. They did decently after they got humiliated by MK Dons in Louis van Gaal's first season. They finished 4th. So it's not like this season is a complete write-off or anything like that. I mean, they may not win a trophy. That's the chances of that have increased, where they've only got the FA Cup now, because nobody's expecting them to challenge for the title, never mind win the title. But it may have to be one of those seasons where they just where the focus is purely climbing the ladder, and if they can do something in the FA Cup, great. But it's not great when you're getting emails in the week from bookmakers saying Ruben Amorim 6-1 to get the sack next. You know that United's in crisis mode when things like that start dropping into your inbox.
Yeah, definitely. And like we said earlier on, after the pre-season and the positivity that generated, we really didn't expect this scenario to play out. But it's quite unique in the fact that after that MK Dons defeat 11 years ago, the next league game for Louis van Gaal was Burnley, albeit at Turf Moor. So history's repeating itself there.
They had a really rocky start. That was the first time I actually went to Turf Moor that game. And Burnley, of course, had just been promoted under Sean Dyche. United were really bad in the first half. Certainly at the start of that game, it was Angel Di Maria's debut, and they were under the cosh very early on. I think Dave Jones, former United midfielder, might have hit the crossbar with a free kick, but there were some really hairy moments. And of course, they were playing in the back three as well. So there's another parallel for you.
And they'd also lost their first home game and drawn the first away game. There's a very similar pattern developing here, Samuel.
No European football this season as well.
Yeah.
So they're destined to finish fourth and without a trophy, which I think they'd snap your hands off.
They would. They certainly would. But just to sort of look ahead a little bit more to this Burnley game, Sal, with a different approach to it. Obviously, we've seen this United team under Ruben Amorim, certainly this calendar year, or certainly since Ruben Amorim came in. They went to City and won. They went to Arsenal and won, albeit on penalty in the FA Cup. They went to Liverpool and delivered a great performance. Do you almost think there's an element of the mindset within this group of players where they're ready to turn it on for the big games, but when they're playing the likes of Grimsby and potentially Burnley as well, they think, we're Manchester United, we're going to win this, whatever. Do you think there's almost a sense of naivety that they think it's going to be easy almost?
Well, there's certainly complacency, and I saw that with the last minute prep for a penalty shootout, because clearly they didn't think that they would go to penalties with Grimsby, and in the end it was United were glad to get penalties because they were 2-0 down with however long it was left in the game. I still think that it's a difficult one, but I don't think they're quite at that level yet, because the record just isn't so comprehensively and overwhelmingly in their favour. This is a team that lost twice to West Ham United last season, and West Ham were terrible last season. West Ham have got worse this season. Those wins against the relegated teams last season, I know they beat Leicester 4 times in 3 different competitions, but in the cup game they needed an added time goal that was clearly offside and would have been disallowed if VAR was in place. But the FA had their strange ruling that VAR didn't come into effect until the 5th round or the quarterfinals. I can't quite remember. But Southampton were minutes away from beating United, and Southampton were the worst team in the Premier League since Derby County in 2007-8. Ipswich probably should have got a result against United, 2-2 at half time and with a man advantage, but United ground out a 3-2 win, and it was a pretty ugly win that night as well, but it had to be because of the circumstances. So they have had some of their best performances under Amorim have been against the bigger teams, and certainly the Arsenal FA Cup tie, Anfield as well, are the 2 that spring to mind. But if you're talking about big games, Tottenham beat United 4 times last season, and the biggest game of all, United they barely turned up in that Europa League final. It was one of the worst finals that I think anybody could have possibly ever seen. So I still think that this United team, unfortunately, they are so bad. It's not even a case of they only just turn up for the big boys and put on a show. Their performances against those teams are by and large relatively respectable. I thought they were the better team in that rather drab derby back in March or April, which ended 0-0. As I said, they played pretty well against Arsenal. I think they've had 4 games against Arsenal under Amorim, and the worst one was undeniably the first, when they lost 2-0 at the Emirates. But since then, second half of the 1-1 draw at Old Trafford last season, they were very good to watch. There was positivity to extract from the defeat a couple of weeks ago, although I was always conscious of not going overboard when United had just lost a game at home and not scored again, which happened far too often last season. So in terms of those performances, they are relatively respectable, but it's extremely undermined by that dreadful Europa League final and losing as limply as they did to Spurs.
Yeah, indeed. It's just a disappointing situation at the minute. It's as simple as that. But away from the pitch, Samuel, everybody's favourite topic right now, transfers. The deadline is almost upon us. 7:00 Monday night, the window will close. What are you expecting United to do in terms of incomings before the bell? Obviously, a goalkeeper is required, a midfielder is required. Do you think they'll achieve both objectives before the klaxon sounds?
If I had to bet, and I'm not a betting man, unlike our colleague Steven Railston, I'd probably say yes to a goalkeeper, no to a midfielder, because I think a lot of parts have to fall in place, and with the midfield situation, and look, if Kobbie Mainoo agitates to go, then they have to bring one in. I mean, they have to bring one in anyway, but they've gone about it in a very blasé way and an unrealistic way as well, I would say, in that I always looked at the Baleba interest and didn't really give it a lot of attention because I thought there's no way that they're signing him this summer. They've not got, I know they've spent a lot of money so far, but I don't think they've got that much money to go out and spend best part of £100 million on a defensive midfielder at Brighton. But the goalkeeping situation needs urgent clarity. And already, in terms of another parallel to the start of that Ten Hag season, they've had a bad start to the season and they've had such a bad result, a la Brentford 3 years ago, that it feels like they're going to have to do some things in response to that, albeit not at the level of overspending on Anthony and overspending on Casemiro to the point that those two become, certainly in Casemiro's case, unshiftable. Anthony will probably still end up leaving, but on loan. And he had season-long loan with obligation or option to buy written all over him throughout the entirety of the summer. Again, it's another transfer. I've tried to avoid using the word in copy all summer, but I'll say it now. Saga. It's been a really, really tedious saga, that one, because you could see what was going to happen from the start. Jadon Sancho, United need money for because he's out of contract next year, and if he's still marooned at United and they're still saddled with him, there's an argument just to pay up his contract, and that might be a new one, paying off a player and staggering his payment in instalments over 5 years just for amortization and PSR, if they can even do that. I've no idea, but he can't be at United this time next week. That would be another failing of the club. And we always forget Tyrone Marshall because he's been such a forgettable player at United the past 2 years, but he should have gone by now. I know he's a tough sell with the injury record, with only 5 starts on loan at PSV, with being substituted 4 times out of his 5 starts under Amorim last season. But he must be available at about £4 million, £5 million at the very most. There must be a club out there who would be prepared to pay that, even pay it in instalments just to get him off the books. But the fact that he's still there, again, it goes back to that United's awful track record of selling players. They are infamously bad sellers, and Chelsea, who were and have been and maybe still are a bit of a basket case of a club, look at the revenue they've generated from player sales. There's clearly a business plan there. It certainly rankles with people at United, some of the deals that Chelsea have executed, and I think that they're sceptical of some of them and how they've been able to do them. But they have done them, and to the point that they are selling players that I've never heard of for nearly £30 million, which just shows what a strange world football has become and is becoming. But United, I go back to David Beckham in 2003 and him being sold for £25 million when he was worth minimum 40 million at that time. I think the world record fee for a player was 50 million, which would have been Zinedine Zidane to Real Madrid. This was the era of the Galacticos. Beckham was 28. He just won the title again with United. He hadn't had his best season. He was England captain. He was the most marketable sports person on the planet. But because Ferguson just wanted rid of him, it was just take 25 million for him. Florentino Perez, I think it was quoted saying, or someone at Real Madrid high up said, they're selling him for peanuts, which is what they did because Ferguson wanted rid of him. And more recently, going back to that MK Dons game, that summer United were just getting rid of players. There was a fire sale where players were allowed to go on the cheap. And United could afford to do that back then because FFP didn't affect them and PSR wasn't even a thing in the Premier League. But it is now, and it does impact them. And also, United have got worse since 2014. In 2014, they finished 7th under David Moyes and then Ryan Giggs as caretaker. The season after that, they finished 4th. So that's it. If you're not in a strong position to sell, that is always going to affect you. And United, being the big club that they are, who've paid big fees, paid big wages, and made those decisions quite badly, and then they get worse as a team, and they've got this history of being really bad at selling players. Clubs can easily work them out. I can work them out. You can work them out. If we can, a negotiator or an executive of a football club can work them out very, very easily. And in the case of Garnacho, the fee, United have tried to put a positive spin on the fee because I think they know that it's not a positive fee that they've got, but they've tried. And they're saying that it's the fourth most expensive sale, most expensive academy sale. Chelsea offered £25 million at the start. We got it up to £40 million. Player wanted to go. It's a good deal. It will represent profit. I get all that. But ultimately, this is a player who's valued at more than €100 million by the CIES Football Observatory this time last year. And he's been sold for £2.5 million more than Amari Hutchinson, who got relegated with Ipswich Town. It is a ridiculously low fee, but United are bad at selling players. It was always going to be Chelsea for Garnacho. Chelsea knew they were the only bidders left at the table. Wait it out, strike a deal, get him on the cheap, no problem.
I was going to ask you about Garnacho as the next point, Samuel, and I agree with you. I think 40 million is incredibly cheap for a player of his potential and what he's achieved so far. 26 goals in 144 games for United by the age of 21. It's a handsome record for a young player. Let's be fair. He's done the business. 16 goals in the Premier League as well. £40 million for his potential and his quality for what he's achieved as well, and for a player that will have his eyes on being a key part of the Argentina squad at the World Cup next summer. Potentially, it could be a bargain for Chelsea because we know what he's capable of. Yes, there's been issues off the pitch with his attitude, his social media antics, this, that, and the other. But as a footballer, he's a very, very talented player.
He's got a world-class ceiling. I've said that before, and I'd say it again. His attitude is a problem. He is too puerile at times, and his character is questionable. Other clubs did due diligence on him and thought he's not for us, so they decided to walk away. Chelsea were more than happy to remain at the table and put a bid in and get him in on the cheap. But it is a shame that it's got to this. And of course, that picture of Garnacho, Højlund and Mainu against West Ham, taken only 18 months ago, is getting a lot of traction because one of them's going, Højlund's probably going, and Mainu could go as well, all within the space of 3 days, those three players, which just shows you that nothing should ever surprise you in football. That's how remarkably quickly things can change. And it feels like Garnacho's been at United a long time, but it's only been 5 years. He obviously joined as a 16-year-old, but he's achieved an awful lot in that time in terms of the number of appearances he's made. I thought in Ten Hag's second season, he was the player of the year. I think to have assumed that much responsibility as a 19-year-old in that team and the injury crises they had and the other crises they went through, and to play as well as he did. And an example is a Liverpool FA Cup quarter-final, which wasn't his best game by any stretch, but he was involved in all 4 goals that day. And he had a hamstring injury earlier in the week that he was managing, and he got through 120 minutes in that FA Cup quarter-final epic. And that was in a season where he actually didn't suffer a single injury. His injury record is terrific for a winger in particular, given how they can be the target of hatchet men. I think he's gone more than 2 years without getting injured, which is some going. And he's come through the academy. You have to be a bit pragmatic with those things, because I think Mainu is hitting more of a nerve because he comes from Manchester, which is perfectly understandable. Garnacho, where he was born in Madrid, Argentina international, I think pragmatically I certainly never looked at him and thought he's going to spend the rest of his career at Manchester United. I'd have liked him to have spent longer at Manchester United than 5 years, but things have changed, and ultimately he was someone who just jarred with the head coach and the way the head coach wanted to play, even though they actually both tried to make it work and put a decent amount of effort into trying to make it work as well. And when Garnacho was put next to Amorim for the pre-match press conference for the semi-final second leg against Athletic Bilbao, that's always an indicator that the manager has trust in this player. This is one of the players that the manager really values and can lean on. But the turning point was the following evening when Mason Mount came on and scored 2 goals, and Amorim I thought it was a knee-jerk reaction at the time, decided then there that Mount had to start in the Europa League final, and he started at the expense of Garnacho, who didn't throw his toys out the pram, he threw the pram as well. And that did it for him at United. He was told shortly after that he could leave. And again, it's not a surprise that here's a player that wants to leave, who United want rid of, who's in a bomb squad, who's not training with them, who's not going on tour. It's not a surprise that a deal is struck in the final week of the transfer window.
Now, to wrap up, Samuel, on the last note, obviously there's a lot of ifs and buts with the final days of the transfer window. We know how it can change in an instant. Say if Mainu, Højlund and Garnacho do go, could be one or two other departures as well, Anthony, Jadon Sancho. Obviously, we've been big supporters of the signings United have made in terms of Mbeumo and Cunha in particular. But do you think this squad, potentially, if these deals do happen, is weaker than the one that finished last season?
So just go through that again. So, I mean, the bomb squad are irrelevant anyway.
Yeah,
so
if
they don't bring anybody else in.
Yeah, and say if Mainu, Højlund go, Garnacho, does it look weaker than the squad that finished the end of last season? I suppose there's two ways of looking at it. It's not an easy one, I admit.
I'd say probably not, because I think they've got, central defence, they look in pretty good shape there, despite what happened in midweek. But in terms of the personnel and some of the quality they've got there, that is an area that was always going to be untouched this summer, and quite rightly so. They've got a lot of forwards now. They've got too many number 10s. The balance of number 10s and central midfielders is clearly not right. They've signed a striker who, in theory, should be better than Højlund, but he's actually had a worse start to his United career than Højlund. And there's not a backup striker, but there wasn't really a backup striker last season either, because United thought they'd signed a striker in Xerxes, and then lo and behold, it turns out he's not really a striker. So there's not a lot in it, but I would probably say if Mainu stays, and I really hope he does stay for United, I hope from a personal and a professional perspective, all that, I hope he stays. I think it would be a real shame, even if it was only on a loan. I think that would be really poor, really bad for United to do that or allow that to happen, because I think that the club is at risk of losing its identity with some of the decisions that it's making, whether it be switching to a back three, not having conventional wingers, or making the two. I mean, Garnacho and Mainu was supposed to be the poster boys of the new era, and they'd both come through the academy. To let them both go, I think, would be extreme. So they need to keep Kobbie Mainu. And for me, I'd be starting him against Burnley tomorrow. It's not a midfield pairing that is going to be the way forward, him and Bruno Fernandes. But if you're playing at home to Burnley and you need to win a game, I think you've got to really start going on the attack, going on the front foot, playing like Grimsby did at the start against United is mad. I mean, Christ, the fact that I'm even saying that as a sentence really does tell you that is confirmation United are truly in crisis mode. But in terms of going back to your squad question, I'd probably just say this squad is slightly better than it was at the end of last season. But an interesting thing is, going back to the manager, and look, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that they change manager mid-season again. You know, and I know, I think there's a 90% or 99% chance that the next manager will play a back four. And if you look at that squad at the moment, and if you were to try and make a back four out of it, a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, all of a sudden you look at the left wing and you think, my God, United used to have all these right-footed left wingers, like they had a plethora of them. They've not actually got one now, apart from Sancho, who nobody wants to see in the team. So if you were to try and do that, it's probably Cunha going out there, isn't it? Because he can play from the left, but it's not ideal. And logically, if you were playing that system or that formation, Garnacho would be a left winger, but he burned his bridges with United, and Amorim decided to help him ignite it as well.
Never in a million years did I think we'd have this conversation a few weeks ago, so soon into the season. But that's the reality of Manchester United over the last 12 years, isn't it? We never know what's around the corner. And on that note, we will mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and perhaps a comment as well. We'll be back again next week to review the clash with Burnley and hopefully an uplifting result and possibly a good end to the transfer window as well. Until then, have a great weekend. Take care and see you soon.